I think, again, the problem with being optimistic is that it's naive. So then the question is there an optimism that's not naive? And I think there is. And the optimism that's not naive is just a visualization of how strong people can be. So one of the things that I tell people, I told my students in my class, in MAPS meeting, here's a goal. You want to be the person at the funeral of your father that everyone can rely on. How would that be? You want to be the person who's broken and useless and adding to the misery in the corner. And look, I'm not making light of people's grief. I understand grief. But who do you want to be when there's a crisis? Right? Do you want to be the person that everyone can turn to for strength? It's like, why the hell not? Why not that as a goal? That'd be a good goal, because then if there's a crisis, and there will be, it won't be such a bloody crisis, because there'll be someone there that can deal with it. So when I went and talked to these people at the funeral home, I envisioned that. I thought, okay, well, this is something you have to contend with if you're going to be alive and adult. You have to contend with death and suffering, and you have to be ready for it. And you have to be there for the person, because that's all they're going to have. And so there's a goal, man. And in this time of nihilism, it's what's the point of life? People ask, and they're taught that at universities. What's the point of life? Everything's interpretation. Humanity's a cancer on the planet. Well, how about no? How about not that? How about that there's something to us? And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger. All of the land of Canaan, because of course Abraham went out into the land of strangers, right? But it says that he'll master, if he keeps his covenant, he'll master the land of strangers. That's a wonderful thing to know. And I think a true thing. Because if you're dealing with strangers, I've dealt with lots of strange people in my life. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist, and that isn't to say that everyone that I've dealt with is strange, because that's not the case. But I have encountered some very strange people, and the way to deal with strange people is you never lie to a strange person. That's the thing, especially if they're paranoid. You never lie to someone who's paranoid. It will come back to bite you. And if you're in an extreme situation with someone who's very unpredictable, the only thing you have that works is the truth. That works. I'll tell you a little story. This is in my book. So I had this landlord in Montreal. He lived next door to me. He was an ex-Hells Angels biker. He'd spent a lot of time in prison. And his wife had borderline personality disorder, and she committed suicide when I lived there. And he was a rough guy, and he was a Quebecois. He spoke Joual, which I could hardly understand. And he didn't really know what to make of me, and I didn't really know what to make of him. But we got along. I was very careful talking to him, as you might imagine. But I was. It was very... And we went over, my wife and I went over there, and we had spaghetti dinner one night, and we sort of communicated, and I bought a poster from him, because he made these wooden posters that had neon on them, and that's how he made a living. He kind of trained himself to be a bit of an electronics guy, and so he made these things. And he was trying to quit drinking, and we talked about that. He was a lot older than me. He was like 20 years older than me. I was about 25 at this point. And we got along pretty well. But every now and then he'd go out and drink. And he could really drink, like he was one of these guys who could drink like 60 beer. And you think, well, no one can drink that much, and you're wrong. I studied alcohol for like 10 years. Some of my subjects' fathers drank 40 ounces of vodka a day and had been doing it for 20 years. So you can drink a lot, and he could drink a lot. And what would happen, he was trying to not drink, but he'd go out and go on a binge, and then he'd be gone for like 3 days. And he'd drink up all his money, and then we'd hear him out in the backyard howling at the moon with this little ugly dog he had, And he'd howl, and the dog would howl, and he'd howl, and the dog would howl, and it was rather unsettling, and made my wife nervous. And But worse, now and then he'd come to the door at like 3 in the morning, eh? He'd knock on the door and he'd be standing there. And I don't know how much experience you've had with rough guys who are alcoholic and who are drunk, but they can be upright and unconscious at the same time. And so that was the state that he was in. He'd be just swaying, and he'd ask me if I would like to buy his toaster or his microwave, because he needed some money to keep drinking. And I didn't really want to buy his toaster or his microwave, but when the ex-Hells Angel, Joual speaking, 60 beer drunk Quebecois biker shows up at your door at 3 in the morning and offers to sell you his microwave, the easiest thing is to say, I really need a microwave. So I bought the microwave and the toaster and some other things. But then my wife talked to me, and she liked my landlord, even though she was afraid of him, she liked him. And she said, you can't buy any more appliances because it's not good for him. And I thought, that's an interesting problem, so what the hell am I going to do about this? Because no, I don't want to buy your microwave, just doesn't seem to be the right answer at 3 in the morning. So one time he took me out on his 750 Honda, and he put me on the back of it. He wanted to show me his lair, I guess, his hangouts. And I got his wife's helmet on, but it didn't fit. It just sit on the top of my head. And he said, I got on the bike and he said, if the cops chase us, we're not stopping. and then away we went. And we went to these bars downtown on Saint Laurent. They were very rough places. And he got into like 4 fights that night because he was a rough guy, and these kind of punk guys would come up to him and sort of challenge him and act stupidly around him, and he was very skeptical. And if you were acting stupidly around him for any length of time, he'd just hit you because he felt that that's what you deserved, and perhaps he was right. So I had first-hand opportunity to observe him. So anyways, he, sure enough, about a week or 2 after we had this conversation, he showed up at the door, knock, 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 opened the door, and he was standing there, with his eyes kind of half closed, and he was swaying, and he had, I don't remember what the appliance was this time, but he wanted to sell it to me. And I said, Paul, I can't buy this. I'm not going to buy this because I know you're trying to quit drinking. And if I give you this money, then you're going to go and drink it up. And it's not going to be good for you. And what else did I tell him? I think I told him as well that this whole thing of him coming to my house at like 2 in the morning was scaring my wife, who he liked, and that it had to stop. And believe me, man, I was thinking about what I was saying, because he was watching me like a rough guy watches you. And a rough guy watches you like this. He thinks, if you say one thing that indicates contempt, you're going to bloody well pay for it. And so I was finding my words like, I was crossing a swamp and trying to look for the rocks underneath the surface. And I said what I had to say very, very carefully. And he looked at me for about 15 seconds. And that's a long time to be looked at 3 in the morning. And he left. And he never came back to sell me anything again. And we got along fine. But that's a good illustration of this issue with regards to truth and success in the strange land, because I was in the strange land when I was talking to my neighbor, my landlord then, and I managed to say what was true carefully enough, so despite the fact that he was a very violent person, and that he was a very intoxicated person, and that he had every reason to be suspicious of me, and we couldn't communicate very well, and I didn't do what he wanted, that he took it, and he left, and there was no problem, and life went on just fine after that. And so, we don't want to underestimate the utility of establishing this bounded relationship with the ideal and attempting to live with some nobility in truth while aiming at the highest ideal. There's nothing about that that's anything but strengthening and positive. And it's exactly what you need to set against the catastrophe and uncertainty of life.